The calendar notification on my phone chimed with cruel precision. Olivia. Pre-op appointment, 2:30 p.m. I silenced it with a swipe, my gaze drifting to the empty hospital parking space where Daniel's car should have been. 4 hours late, and my husband was still nowhere to be found. The same husband who had promised to be here for our daughter's final consultation before her scoliosis surgery next week. I shifted uncomfortably in the stiff waiting room chair, watching Olivia flip through a dog-eared magazine, her shoulders visibly uneven beneath her favorite blue sweater. At 12, she was trying so hard to be brave, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes each time the office door opened, hoping her father would walk through. "Dr. Morris will see you now," the receptionist called, offering a sympathetic smile. She'd witnessed my increasingly frantic calls to Daniel over the past hours, each one going straight to voicemail. "Come on, sweetie," I said, gathering our things. "Dad must be caught up at work. He'll meet us at home." Olivia nodded, but the disappointment on her face made my chest ache. This wasn't the first appointment he'd missed, but it was certainly the most important. The surgery to correct her spinal curvature had been scheduled for months, a procedure that would prevent future complications and relieve the pain she'd been stoically enduring. As Dr. Morris reviewed the surgical plan, explaining the recovery process, once more my phone buzzed with a text message. Finally, Daniel responding. I discreetly checked it beneath the edge of my chair, but it wasn't from Daniel. It was from Jennifer, my closest friend since college. "Rebecca, call me ASAP. Need to talk to you about Dan." My stomach tightened. Something in the message's urgency set off warning bells I couldn't ignore. Throughout the rest of the appointment, I maintained my composure for Olivia's sake, asking appropriate questions and taking notes on post-operative care. But my mind was elsewhere, racing with possibilities of what Jennifer might know. "Thanks, Dr. Morris," I said as the appointment concluded. "Olivia's nervous but ready for Tuesday." "She's going to do wonderfully," Dr. Morris assured us both, giving Olivia's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "The surgical team is excellent, and with both parents helping during recovery, she'll be back to normal activities before you know it." Both parents. I swallowed hard and nodded. By the time we reached the parking lot, Olivia's usual cheerfulness had returned, her resilience a stark contrast to my growing unease. "Can we stop for ice cream?" she asked, sliding into my Volvo. Dad promised we could after the appointment. Another promise he wouldn't keep today. "Of course, sweetie, you deserve it." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As Olivia happily devoured her chocolate mint cone at Riverside Creamery, I stepped outside to call Jennifer, the afternoon sun warm against my face despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Jen, what's going on?" Her hesitation spoke volumes before she even answered. "Becky, I don't know how to tell you. This?" "Just say it," I pressed, watching Olivia through the window, blissfully unaware of whatever bomb was about to drop. "Dan's at the airport, right now, with a woman. They're, affectionate. Too affectionate for colleagues." The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. "What airport? Why are you—" "I'm flying to Chicago for that conference, remember? They're at the international terminal. Mexico, I think? I saw them checking in at the Puerto Vallarta counter." Puerto Vallarta. The pieces clicked into horrible alignment. The emergency business trip Daniel had mentioned for next week, the same week as Olivia's surgery. The surgery he'd insisted we should reschedule just yesterday, claiming a conflict with important clients. "Are you sure it's him?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's him, Becky. I'm looking at them right now. She's blonde, maybe early 30s. They're going through security. Can you—" "I'm taking photos. Sending them now." My phone pinged seconds later. I opened the message, and there they were. Daniel and a woman I'd never seen before, laughing as they handed their passports to the TSA agent. His arm was wrapped around her waist, her head leaning into his shoulder with familiar intimacy. "Rebecca, are you okay?" Jennifer's voice sounded distant. "He told me he had a business trip next week," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane building inside me. "He's been pushing to reschedule Olivia's surgery. Said it wasn't urgent enough to interfere with work." Jennifer's outrage spilled through the phone. "That absolute—" "Not now," I cut her off, seeing Olivia waving at me through the window, ready to leave. "I have Olivia. I'll call you later." I ended the call and took several deep breaths, composing myself before returning inside. Every maternal instinct screamed to protect my daughter, not just from her worsening spinal condition, but from the knowledge that her father had prioritized a vacation with his mistress over her health and well-being. "Ready to go home, sweetie?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Let's see if Dad's there." But I already knew he wouldn't be. And with a clarity that surprised me, I also knew exactly what I needed to do next. The house was quiet when we arrived home, our footsteps echoing in the 2-story entryway of the house Daniel had insisted on buying when his financial advisory firm started taking off. 5 bedrooms for 3 people, a showcase rather than a home, designed to impress clients more than comfort family. "Dad's still not back?" Olivia asked, disappointment coloring her voice as she noticed the empty garage space where his Maserati usually sat. "Looks like he's running even later than we thought," I replied, setting down my purse on the kitchen island. "Why don't you go rest for a bit? I need to make some calls." Once Olivia disappeared upstairs, I moved to Daniel's home office with purposeful steps. In 12 years of marriage, I'd rarely invaded this space, his private domain where he managed his business, affairs, and apparently his duplicitous personal life. The room was immaculate, like everything in Daniel's world. Surface perfection hiding whatever mess lurked beneath. I sat at his desk, running my fingers along the polished mahogany surface before waking his computer. Password protected, of course. But Daniel had always underestimated me, assuming that my lack of interest in his financial business meant a lack of capability. What he'd forgotten was that before becoming a full-time mother to Olivia, I'd worked in cybersecurity. And more importantly, that I'd watched him enter his password countless times when he thought I wasn't paying attention. 3 attempts later, I was in. His email was first, filtered specifically for travel arrangements. And there it was. Confirmation for 2 first-class tickets to Puerto Vallarta, departing today, returning next Wednesday. The same day as Olivia's surgery. 2 luxury hotel reservations at the El Dorado Resort, Ocean View Suite, champagne service included. Names on the reservation: Daniel Wilson and Megan Phillips. Megan Phillips. The name swirled in my mind, vaguely familiar until I remembered. His new client relations manager, hired 6 months ago. The one he'd mentioned working late with so frequently lately. Next, I checked his calendar. Tuesday, the day of Olivia's surgery, had been completely cleared, replaced with a single entry: deep-sea fishing excursion with M. The hurricane inside me condensed into something colder, harder, more focused. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about a father deliberately abandoning his child during a serious medical procedure to vacation with his mistress. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Bennett, Crawford and Associates," a receptionist answered. "Harold Bennett, please. Tell him Rebecca Wilson is calling. Rebecca Montgomery Wilson." The Montgomery name, my family name, still carried weight, and within moments my grandfather's longtime attorney was on the line. "Rebecca, this is unexpected. How are you?" His voice carried the same steadfast calmness I remembered from childhood visits to his office, where he'd managed my grandfather's substantial estate. "Not well, Harold. I need your help, and I need it immediately." I proceeded to explain the situation in clear, precise terms, my voice never wavering despite the betrayal it described. He listened without interruption until I'd finished. I see. And you're certain about all this? I'm looking at the evidence right now. Flight confirmations, hotel reservations, everything. And what would you like me to do? I need to know my options regarding the Montgomery Trust, specifically Daniel's access to it. When my grandfather had died, he'd left his estate in a complex trust arrangement. As his only grandchild, I was the primary beneficiary. But upon my marriage, provisions had been made to give Daniel limited access to certain funds, primarily for Olivia's benefit and for investments specifically approved by the trust managers. Harold's voice took on the professional tone I needed right now. As the primary beneficiary, you have significant control over secondary access. Your grandfather was quite insistent on protections that would allow you to restrict or revoke spousal privileges under certain circumstances, such as abandonment, financial malfeasance, actions contrary to the beneficiary's best interests, particularly regarding any children. He paused. Canceling a child's necessary medical procedure for a vacation with a paramour would certainly qualify. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The word paramour nearly made me laugh despite everything. Such an old-fashioned term for something so tawdry. What do I need to do? I can prepare the paperwork immediately. We'll need documentation of the surgery scheduling, his knowledge of it, and evidence of his conflicting plans. Can you compile that? Already working on it, I said, forwarding the travel confirmations to my personal email. How quickly can this be executed? Given the circumstances, particularly the imminent medical concerns, I can have everything processed by tomorrow. The trust allows for emergency provisions. And his access can be suspended immediately upon filing, pending review. But, Rebecca, his voice softened slightly, you should be prepared for the personal fallout. This will effectively cut him off from significant financial resources. I understand. And I did. This wasn't just about punishing Daniel anymore. It was about protecting Olivia and myself from a man who had proven he couldn't be trusted with either our hearts or our welfare. After ending the call, I sat motionless at Daniel's desk, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. 12 years of marriage, dissolving like sugar in rain. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel devastated. I felt clear-headed, determined, and most surprisingly, relieved. As if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't fully recognized until the moment it lifted. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, the first contact all day. Urgent client emergency. Flying to Houston. Tonight, back Tuesday evening. Don't wait up. The lie was so casual, so practiced, it confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't his first deception, just the first one I'd caught. And the timing, Tuesday evening after Olivia's surgery would be completed, couldn't have been more transparent. I didn't respond. Instead, I gathered the evidence I needed, then left his office exactly as I'd found it. He would never suspect I knew anything until it was too late. Upstairs, I found Olivia lying on her bed, scrolling through her phone, her position carefully arranged to minimize discomfort from her spine. "Hey, Mom," she said, looking up. "Dad texted me. He said he has to go to Houston for work and he's super sorry about missing the appointment." The casual way she accepted this, the practiced disappointment that had become routine, broke my heart more than any of Daniel's betrayals. "Actually, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside her, "I need to talk to you about something important." I wouldn't tell her everything. She didn't need the burden of her father's complete betrayal. But she deserved some truth about the days ahead. "Dad's going to be away for a while, even during your surgery next week." I took her hand in mine. "But I promise you, I will be there every second. And Aunt Jennifer is coming to help too." Her eyes widened with concern. "Is everything okay?" With you and Dad? Children always know more than we give them credit for. I squeezed her hand gently. Your dad and I have some things to figure out, but what's most important right now is getting your surgery done and making sure you recover properly. And I promise you, nothing is going to interfere with that. She nodded, searching my face with eyes too perceptive for a 12-year-old. Is that why you were on the phone with Mr. Bennett? I startled. How did you... I came down to ask if we could order pizza, and I heard you talking. She bit her lip. Isn't he Grandpa Montgomery's lawyer? The one who handles the trust? My brilliant daughter. Of course she remembered Harold from the few formal family events we'd attended over the years. Yes, he is, I admitted. I'm making some changes to protect us. Olivia was quiet for a moment, then asked in a small voice, Dad's not coming back after Houston, is he? I pulled her into a gentle hug, mindful of her sensitive back. I don't know what's going to happen with Dad and me yet, but I do know that you and I are going to be okay. More than okay. As I held her, I felt her relax against me, trusting in my promise. And in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision, not just reacting to Daniel's betrayal, but taking the first step toward rebuilding a life where neither Olivia nor I would have to accept disappointment as our normal state. My phone buzzed again, Harold confirming our meeting first thing tomorrow morning. Beyond him, I had Jennifer arriving tonight to help with Olivia. Dr. Morris already notified about Daniel's absence from the surgery, and the first pieces of my financial firewall being established. Daniel thought he was flying off to paradise with his girlfriend while his daughter prepared for major surgery. What he didn't realize was that by the time his plane touched down in Puerto Vallarta, the life he'd taken for granted, and the financial security that came with it, would already be slipping through his fingers like sand. Morning came with the determined efficiency I'd cultivated as Olivia's mother. By 7:30, I'd made breakfast, helped Olivia with her back exercises, and prepared for my 9 a.m. meeting with Harold Bennett. Jennifer had arrived late the previous night, setting up in our guest room with promises to take Olivia shopping for post-surgery comfort items, while I handled the legal stuff, as we'd carefully termed it in front of my daughter. You sure you don't want me to come with you? Jennifer asked, pouring coffee into a travel mug for me. Her eyes were still puffy from our late-night conversation, during which I'd shared the full extent of Daniel's deception. I need to do this part alone, I replied, checking my portfolio one last time. Besides, Olivia needs the distraction. She's stronger than you think, you know, Jennifer said, glancing toward the family room where Olivia was scrolling through Netflix. Kids sense these things long before we tell them. I know. I sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. That's what worries me. She's been dealing with her father's disappointments for too long already. The drive to Bennett, Crawford and Associates took me through the wealthy historic district of Oak Ridge, past the old money estates and carefully maintained heritage buildings that had defined my childhood. The Montgomery name appeared periodically on the library, the children's hospital wing, the botanical gardens, subtle reminders of my family's century-long presence in the city's development. I'd turned away from this legacy when I married Daniel, not out of rejection, but from a desire to build something that felt entirely my own. The irony that I was now rushing back to the security of my family name wasn't lost on me. Harold's office remained unchanged since my last visit years ago. Leather-bound law books lining mahogany shelves, the subtle scent of lemon polish, certificates, and credentials tastefully framed on dark green walls. It exuded exactly what clients sought: permanence, tradition, stability. Rebecca. Harold stood as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from his imposing desk. At 72, he retained the sharp alertness that had made him my grandfather's most trusted advisor. I've prepared everything as discussed. Thank you for moving so quickly, I said, setting my portfolio on his desk. The Montgomery Trust has always been my priority. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Your grandfather would have expected nothing less, especially where Olivia is concerned. I nodded, unexpectedly moved by the mention of my grandfather, who had doted on Olivia during the brief time they'd known each other. What's our first step? Harold adjusted his glasses and opened a leather folder. I've prepared an emergency motion to suspend Daniel's access to all trust-related accounts and properties, effective immediately. The evidence you provided gives us clear grounds under the trust's moral conduct and family welfare provisions. He slid several documents toward me, each flagged with colored tabs indicating signature lines. This first form initiates the suspension. The second documents the reasons. I've cited abandonment of parental responsibility and misrepresentation of financial intentions. Will this affect his business? I asked, uncapping the Mont Blanc pen Harold provided. My grandfather's, I realized with a pang, recognizing the distinctive monogram. That depends on how deeply he's integrated trust funds into his operations, Harold replied carefully. Has he done so without your knowledge? I'm not certain, I admitted. He's always kept his business matters separate from our personal finances. Then we should proceed with the assumption that there may be entanglements. Harold's expression remained neutral, professional. Are you prepared for that possibility? I paused, pen hovering above the signature line. Was I prepared to potentially disrupt or even destroy the business Daniel had spent a decade building? The business he'd apparently valued above his daughter's health and his marriage vows. Yes, I said firmly, signing my name with a decisive stroke. If Daniel has improperly utilized trust funds, that's his responsibility, not mine. Harold nodded, processing each document as I signed. The suspension will be processed immediately. By this afternoon, his access cards, passwords, and authorization codes will be deactivated. The trust managers have already been alerted to reject any pending transactions. What about our joint accounts? Those aren't affected by this action, Harold explained. However, I've taken the liberty of preparing separate paperwork should you wish to protect those assets as well. I considered this. Our joint accounts were substantial but not extraordinary, enough for several months of comfortable living, but not the deeper resources Daniel might need for legal battles or extended support of his extramarital lifestyle. Let's hold on those. For now, I decided. I want to see his reaction to the trust suspension first. Harold collected the signed forms, handing them to his assistant who appeared silently at his side. These need immediate processing, he instructed. Priority protocol. Turning back to me, his expression softened slightly. Now, about Olivia's surgery. I understand it's scheduled for Tuesday? Yes. Pre-operative check-in is Monday afternoon, surgery first thing Tuesday morning. And your husband is aware of this schedule? Completely aware, I confirmed. He received all the same emails and calendar invitations I did. He attended the initial consultation when the surgery was first recommended, though he's missed most. Follow-up since then. Harold made a note. And you have documentation of his travel plans coinciding with the surgery date? I opened my portfolio, extracting printed copies of Daniel's flight, hotel, and excursion confirmations. Everything's here, including screenshots of text messages where he claimed to be in Houston for business during the surgery. Harold reviewed the documents, his expression darkening slightly at the deep-sea fishing reservation specifically scheduled during Olivia's surgery time. This is remarkably blatant. He never thought I'd check, I said, the realization still stinging despite my growing anger. He assumed I'd simply believe whatever he told me, like I always have. People reveal themselves through what they think they can get away with, Harold observed, organizing the evidence into a separate folder. These will be kept in secured files. Now, is there anything else you need today? I hesitated, then asked the question that had been lurking at the edges of my thoughts since yesterday. What happens when Daniel discovers what I've done? Legally speaking. Harold removed his glasses, polishing them methodically as he considered his response. He can petition the trust managers for reinstatement, but given the evidence, such a petition would almost certainly be denied. He could attempt legal action, claiming the suspension was unjustified, but litigation against the Montgomery Trust has historically been unsuccessful. The subtle pride in Harold's voice reminded me of an important fact. My grandfather had selected his legal team with the same meticulous care he'd applied to all aspects of his empire. The Montgomery Trust wasn't just wealthy, it was strategically fortified against precisely these scenarios. And if he tries to contact me directly, tries to force his way back into our lives, Harold's expression hardened imperceptibly. That would be inadvisable for him. The trust includes provisions for security personnel if needed. And should this lead to divorce proceedings, as I suspect it might, we have considerable resources to ensure your and Olivia's well-being. The word divorce hung in the air between us. Until that moment, I hadn't consciously acknowledged that our marriage was over, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly brought clarity rather than pain. I think that's where this is heading, I admitted. I just need to get through Olivia's surgery first. One step at a time, Harold agreed. Focus on your daughter's health. We'll handle everything else. As I stood to leave, Harold came around the desk and took both my hands in his. A surprisingly personal gesture from a man known for his professional reserve. Your grandfather would be very proud of you today, Rebecca, he said quietly. Not because you're utilizing the protections he put in place, but because you're doing so with such dignity and purpose. The unexpected kindness nearly broke through the composure I'd been maintaining. I squeezed his hands briefly, then gathered my things and left before emotions could overtake me. Outside, the spring morning had blossomed into a perfect day, kind that usually filled me with optimism. Today, it merely served as a backdrop for the storm I knew was coming. I checked my watch, 10:47 a.m. Daniel's plane would have landed in Puerto Vallarta by now. He and Megan would be checking into their ocean view suite, perhaps already celebrating their escape with champagne. My phone rang as I reached my car. Lisa Martinez, the administrative coordinator from Dr. Morris's office. Mrs. Wilson, I'm calling about Olivia's surgery scheduling. My heart stuttered. Is there a problem? No, quite the opposite. We've had a cancellation, and Dr. Morris wondered if you'd prefer to move Olivia's procedure up to tomorrow morning instead of Tuesday. The surgical team is available, and Dr. Morris thought you might appreciate having the procedure completed sooner. Tomorrow. The word echoed in my mind, possibilities rapidly realigning. If Olivia's surgery was tomorrow, she would already be recovering by the time Daniel discovered his financial situation. We would be safely ensconced in the hospital, surrounded by medical staff, when the inevitable explosion occurred. That would be perfect, I said, feeling another piece of the puzzle slot into place. What time should we arrive? Check-in would be at 6 a.m., with surgery scheduled for 8 a.m. I'll email you the updated instructions right away. Thank you, Lisa. This is actually ideal for us. As I drove home, my mind worked through the implications of this change. I would need to accelerate some of my preparations, but the new timeline offered strategic advantages I hadn't anticipated. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, Olivia's most vulnerable period would be behind her. Jennifer met me at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How did it go? It's done, I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. Where's Olivia? Upstairs, packing her hospital bag. She's being very methodical about it. You should see the checklist she made. Despite everything, I smiled. She gets that from me. So what now? Jennifer asked, following me into the kitchen. Now we prepare for some significant changes. I recounted my meeting with Harold and the unexpected call from the hospital. Olivia's surgery has been moved to tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Jennifer's eyes widened. That's fast. It's perfect timing, actually. We'll be safely at the hospital when Daniel discovers he's been cut off. Jennifer leaned against the counter, studying me. You know, when you called me yesterday, I expected to find you in tears, devastated. But you're different. Stronger than I've seen you in years. I don't have the luxury of falling apart right now, I replied, filling the electric kettle for tea. Olivia needs me to be absolutely solid. It's more than that, Jennifer insisted. It's like you're finally fully yourself again. Her observation struck me with unexpected force. Was that what was happening? Was I reclaiming some essential part of myself that had gradually disappeared during my marriage? Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an email notification from Harold Bennett. Suspension executed. All access terminated effectively immediately. Security protocols activated. It was done. Daniel was now cut off from the Montgomery Trust and all its resources. The clock was ticking until he discovered this fact. "Mom," Olivia called from upstairs. "Can you check if I've packed everything I need?" "Coming, sweetie," I called, back setting down my phone. Jennifer gave my arm a supportive squeeze. "Go help your daughter. I'll make lunch." Upstairs, I found Olivia sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by neatly organized piles of items for her hospital stay: pajamas, toiletries, books, her tablet, headphones. "I think I've got everything," she said, consulting her handwritten list. "But can you double-check?" I sat beside her, carefully reviewing her preparations. "This is very thorough, Liv. But guess what? I have some news. The hospital called, and they can do your surgery tomorrow instead of Tuesday." Olivia's eyes widened. "Tomorrow? But what about Dad? He won't be back from Houston until Tuesday night." The innocent question pierced my heart. Even now, preparing for major surgery, she was concerned about her father's absence. "I know, sweetheart," I said gently. "I've already let him know about the change, but he might not be able to adjust his business trip on such short notice." The lie tasted bitter, but it seemed kinder than the truth in this moment. Olivia nodded, disappointment briefly clouding her features before she masked it with practiced acceptance. "That's okay. You'll be there. And Aunt Jen too, right?" "The whole time," I promised, smoothing her hair. "And I have more good news. Dr. Morris says that with the earlier surgery date, you might even be able to start school on time next fall." This genuinely brightened her expression. "Really? That would be amazing." As we reorganized her hospital bag together, adding a few items I knew from experience she would need, I felt a renewed surge of determination. Daniel's betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against this brave, resilient child who deserved so much better from her father. The afternoon passed in purposeful preparation. I contacted Olivia's school, arranged for her assignments to be sent home during recovery, and prepared the downstairs guest room where she would stay after discharge, eliminating the need to navigate stairs during her initial recovery. Jennifer coordinated with friends who had offered to provide meals, creating a schedule that would ensure we had support through the first critical weeks after surgery. Every detail was addressed with the focused efficiency that had once made me a rising star in cybersecurity before I'd stepped back to focus on family. At 4:15 p.m., my phone rang with an international number I didn't recognize. Daniel, calling from Mexico. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer, then decided that maintaining normalcy a bit longer served my purposes best. "Hello?" "Becky." Daniel's voice carried the forced casualness of someone working too hard to sound natural. "How did the pre-op appointment go yesterday?" "Sorry I missed it. This client situation has been a nightmare." The audacity of his lie momentarily stole my breath. I moved to my bedroom, closing the door for privacy. "The appointment went fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Actually, there's been a change in plans. They've moved Olivia's surgery to tomorrow morning instead of Tuesday." A lengthy pause followed. "Tomorrow? That's That's very sudden. It was a cancellation. Dr. Morris thought we'd want to take advantage of it, especially given Olivia's pain levels lately. I allowed that last bit to hang in the air, a subtle reminder of what should have been his primary concern. I see. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him calculating, trying to figure out how to maintain his deception. Well, that's going to be difficult with my schedule here in Houston. These clients, don't worry about it. I interrupted, surprised by the ice in my own voice. Jennifer is here helping me. We've got everything under control. Jennifer's there? Something in his tone shifted, wariness perhaps. Daniel had never been entirely comfortable with my college friend, always claiming she was too judgmental of him. She's staying with us through Olivia's recovery period. That's nice of her. He cleared his throat. Listen, I might be able to wrap things up here early. If I can get a flight out tomorrow, don't rearrange your important meetings. On our account, I said, unable to keep a hint of sharpness from my tone. As you've always said, Olivia's condition isn't life-threatening. We'll manage without you. The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken awareness. Had I revealed too much? Could he sense that I knew? Rebecca, he finally said, his voice carefully modulated. Is everything okay between us? The question was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that I almost laughed. Was everything okay between us? While he stood on a Mexican beach with his mistress, asking about the marriage he'd already betrayed in the most fundamental way? We can discuss that when you're back from your business trip, I replied evenly. Right now, my focus is entirely on Olivia. Of course, he agreed quickly. Give her my love. Tell her I'll try to call tomorrow after her surgery. I'll let her know. After ending the call, I sat motionless on the edge of my bed, phone still clutched in my hand. Daniel was still fully committed to his lie, even as circumstances threatened to unravel it. The realization solidified something inside me. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a one-time mistake. This was who he was, who he had perhaps always been. A gentle knock at my door pulled me from these thoughts. Jennifer peeked in, her expression concerned. Was that him? I nodded. Still claiming to be in Houston, he actually had the nerve to say he'd try to rearrange his schedule to be here tomorrow. Jennifer's response was unprintable but satisfyingly emphatic. When do you think he'll discover the trust situation? Soon, I said, glancing at my watch. Harold said all access was terminated this afternoon. If he tries to use any of the trust-linked credit cards for dinner or services at the resort, front row seats to that meltdown would almost be worth the price of a flight to Mexico, Jennifer remarked dryly. Despite everything, I smiled. Let's focus on what matters. Olivia needs a calm evening before surgery tomorrow. We spent that evening creating a bubble of normalcy for Olivia, her favorite pasta for dinner, a movie marathon of comfort films, and an early bedtime with extra hugs. If she sensed the underlying tension, she didn't show it, chatting excitedly about how quickly she might recover and whether her friends could sign her back brace after surgery. After she was asleep, Jennifer and I sat in the kitchen, speaking, in low voices as we finalized preparations for the morning. Hospital bag is packed and by the door, Jennifer confirmed. Alarm set for 4:30 a.m. I've got a playlist of her favorite songs ready for the drive there. You've thought of everything, I said gratefully, refilling our tea mugs. Not everything, Jennifer admitted. I still don't know what to say if she asks why her dad hasn't called again before surgery. I sighed, rubbing my temples where a tension headache threatened. Let's hope she doesn't. But if she does, we'll simply say he's in meetings and the time difference makes it difficult. Jennifer nodded, though her expression remained troubled. And after? When she's recovering and he's still not here? When the truth inevitably comes out? We'll tell her what's appropriate for her age and emotional state, I said firmly. She doesn't need all the sordid details, just enough to understand that her father made choices that affected our family. And if he tries to turn this around on you, you know he will. Men like Daniel always find a way to make themselves the victim. I had considered this possibility too. Daniel was charming, persuasive, and skilled at reshaping narratives to his advantage. But he had miscalculated badly this time. Let him try, I said with quiet confidence. I have evidence, witness. Accounts, and most importantly, the moral high ground. He abandoned his daughter during major surgery to vacation with his mistress. There's no spinning that, Jen. Not to our friends, not to his colleagues, and certainly not to Olivia. Jennifer studied me over the rim of her mug. You know, Daniel never really saw you, the real you. He saw what he wanted to see, the supportive wife, the Montgomery fortune, the social connections. But he missed the steel underneath. Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling since this began, a reclaiming of parts of myself that had been submerged during my marriage. The strategic thinker, the problem solver, the woman who faced challenges head-on rather than accommodating others at her own expense. I lost myself somewhere along the way, I admitted softly. Became so focused on being what he expected that I forgot who I actually am. Well, you're remembering now, Jennifer said, raising her mug in a small toast. And frankly, it's glorious to watch. At 11:37 p.m., just as we were preparing for bed, my phone exploded with notifications. First a text from Harold. Contact initiated. Protocols engaged. Then, seconds later, a barrage from Daniel. What the hell is going on with my cards? Why am I being told I'm not authorized on the Montgomery accounts? Rebecca, call me. Immediately. This is an emergency. Jennifer peered over my shoulder at the messages. And so it begins. I set my phone down without responding, a strange calm settling over me. Perfect timing. By morning, he'll be absolutely frantic, and we'll be safely at the hospital, surrounded by medical staff and security. You're not going to answer him? Not tonight, I said decisively. Tonight I need to rest. Tomorrow is about Olivia, not him. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder supportively. Good plan. He deserves to stew in his own mess for a while. As we turned out the lights and headed to our respective rooms, I felt oddly liberated. For the first time in years, I was acting rather than reacting. Making decisions based on what was truly best for Olivia and myself, not what would keep the peace or maintain appearances. My phone continued to buzz with Daniel's increasingly desperate messages, but I simply turned it face down on my nightstand. Whatever storm he was experiencing in Puerto Vallarta, the humiliation of declined cards, the explanations to his mistress, the dawning realization that I knew everything, was entirely of his own making. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Olivia's surgery, her recovery, and eventually the painful conversations about why her father wasn't present. But tonight, as I closed my eyes and focused on the morning ahead, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Rebecca Montgomery Wilson, not just Daniel's wife or Olivia's mother, but a woman reclaiming her strength, her purpose, and her future. At 4:30 a.m., my alarm broke through the shallow sleep I'd managed to achieve. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind before reality rushed back. Olivia's surgery. Today. I rose quietly, padding across the plush carpet to my bathroom. The face that greeted me in the mirror looked remarkably composed, considering the emotional turbulence of the past 48 hours. By 5:15, Olivia was awake, unusually quiet as Jennifer helped her dress in the comfortable clothes we'd selected for her hospital journey. The pre-surgery instructions prohibited food or water since midnight, making for a somber breakfast table where only Jennifer and I sipped coffee while Olivia stared longingly at her empty place setting. "Can we go now?" she finally asked, fidgeting with her hoodie zipper. I'd rather wait there than here. The vulnerability in her voice squeezed my heart. Of course, sweetie. Let's get your bag. The drive to Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital took us through deserted early morning streets, the sky still dark above us. Jennifer had indeed prepared a playlist of Olivia's favorite songs, but my daughter showed no interest in music this morning, instead staring silently out the window, her fingers occasionally reaching to touch her back where the pain was worst. "Did Dad call before we left?" she asked suddenly as we approached the hospital, the question I'd been dreading. "Not yet, honey," I replied carefully. "It's very early, probably still the middle of the night in Houston." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. But he knows today is the big day, and I'm sure he'll check in when he can. She nodded, accepting this explanation with the practiced resignation of a child accustomed to parental disappointment. I caught Jennifer's eyes in the rearview mirror, sharing a moment of silent outrage on Olivia's behalf. The pediatric surgical wing of Oak Ridge Memorial bore the Montgomery name on a discreet plaque, my grandfather's donation decades ago, ensuring that children from all economic backgrounds could receive top-tier care. The irony wasn't lost on me that his generosity would now benefit his own great-granddaughter. Check-in proceeded efficiently. Olivia's paperwork was in order, pre-authorization forms completed days ago. A young nurse named Amelia greeted us warmly, seemingly unaffected by the early hour. "Good morning, Olivia. I'll be helping you get ready for your surgery today," she said cheerfully, leading us to the pre-op area. "I love your sneakers. Purples. My favorite color, too." Olivia managed a small smile, clutching her backpack tightly as we followed Amelia through double doors into a section with curtained cubicles. Our assigned space contained a hospital bed sized for pediatric patients, monitoring equipment, and a single chair that looked uncomfortably institutional. "Let's get you changed into this stylish gown," Amelia joked, handing Olivia a patterned hospital gown with cartoon characters. "Mom can help you, and then we'll need to get some vitals." As I assisted Olivia with changing, the reality of what was happening hit me with fresh intensity. My daughter's slender back revealed the curve in her spine that necessitated today's procedure, a condition that had caused her increasing pain and could limit her mobility if left untreated. Daniel's absence from this moment seemed even more unforgivable as I helped her onto the bed, her brave face unable to fully mask her fear. "You're being so strong," I whispered, kissing her forehead before Amelia returned to take her temperature, blood pressure, and other pre-surgical measurements. "Great numbers," Amelia pronounced, making notes in the electronic chart. "Dr. Morris will be in soon for a quick check, and then we'll give Olivia something to help her relax before we head to the OR." When Amelia stepped out, Jennifer moved closer to the bed, offering Olivia her well-worn stuffed rabbit that had accompanied her to every hospital visit since diagnosis. "Mr. Flopsy is ready for his big adventure today." "I'm too old for stuffed animals," Olivia protested weakly, even as her fingers reached for the familiar comfort. "Nobody's too old for Mr. Flopsy," Jennifer insisted. "Even your mom hugged him yesterday." This earned a genuine smile from Olivia, temporarily easing the tension in the small space. Dr. Morris arrived at 7:15, her confident presence immediately filling the room. "Good morning, Team Wilson. Ready for the big day, Olivia?" Olivia nodded, clutching Mr. Flopsy tighter. "Will it hurt a lot? After, I mean." "You'll definitely be sore," Dr. Morris acknowledged honestly. "But we have excellent pain management plans, and within a few days you'll start feeling much better than you did before surgery. Remember those models I showed you? We're going to straighten that spine so it can grow properly." She turned to me next. "And Mom, you've got all the post-op instructions, the special pillows for positioning?" "Everything's ready at home," I confirmed. "We've prepared the downstairs guest room so Olivia won't need to navigate stairs." "Perfect." Dr. Morris made a final note in the chart. "Any questions before we proceed?" "Her father won't be here today," I said quietly, stepping slightly away from the bed, though Olivia could still hear. "He's unavailable." The word carried more meaning than my neutral tone suggested. Dr. Morris's expression shifted subtly. Flash of judgment quickly replaced by professional neutrality. "I see. We'll make sure you have all the support you need." She squeezed my arm briefly, a gesture of understanding between women that spoke volumes. After reviewing final details about the procedure, expected duration, and when I could see Olivia again, Dr. Morris left to prepare for surgery. Minutes later, an anesthesiologist arrived to explain his role and answer questions, followed by a surgical nurse who would be monitoring Olivia throughout the procedure. The quiet efficiency of these professionals provided a strange comfort. Whatever chaos swirled in my personal life, here was a team of people focused solely on my daughter's well-being, following protocols refined through thousands of similar procedures. At 7:45, Amelia returned with a syringe containing the pre-surgical sedative. "This will make you feel very relaxed, Olivia. Some kids say it makes them feel like they're floating." As the medication entered Olivia's system through the IV line installed earlier, her tense expression gradually softened, eyelids growing heavy. "I feel funny," she murmured, her grip on Mr. Flopsy loosening. "Mom? You'll be here when I wake up, right?" "Right here," I promised, stroking her hair. "The very first person you'll see." "And Dad?" she asked, voice already slurring from the medication. "Will he call?" Jennifer's hand found mine, squeezing tightly as I maintained my composure. "Let's focus on you getting better, sweetheart. That's all that matters right now." Olivia's eyes closed fully as the sedative took complete effect. 2 surgical attendants arrived to transport her to the operating room, efficiently transferring her to a gurney while explaining I could accompany her as far as the surgical suite doors. The journey through hospital corridors felt surreal, my hand resting lightly on Olivia's arm as the gurney moved smoothly toward double doors marked, "Authorized personnel only." "This is where we need to say goodbye for now," Amelia explained, gently. "The surgery should take about 4 hours, and Dr. Morris will come find you in the waiting area as soon as it's complete." I leaned down, pressing a kiss to Olivia's forehead. "I love you, brave girl. See you soon." Though sedated, she seemed to hear me, her lips curving slightly upward before the gurney continued through the doors, leaving Jennifer and me standing in the suddenly empty hallway. "She's in good hands," Jennifer reassured me, guiding me toward the surgical waiting area. "Dr. Morris is the best." The waiting room was designed for comfort, with cushioned chairs, subdued lighting, and a self-service coffee station. Only 2 other families occupied the space this early, each locked in their own private vigils. As we settled in for the long wait, I checked my phone for the first time since arriving at the hospital. The screen displayed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages from Daniel, escalating in urgency and anger with each unanswered attempt. What the hell is going on with my accounts? "The hotel says my cards are being declined." "Answer your damn phone, Rebecca. Is this some kind of joke? You have no right to cut me off from my money. I'm trying to book a flight back, but I can't access any funds. Call me immediately, or I swear to God." The messages grew increasingly desperate and threatening, culminating in one sent just 20 minutes ago. "I've borrowed money for a flight, landing in Oak Ridge tonight. You'd better have a good explanation for this, Rebecca. You have no idea what you've done." I showed the final message to Jennifer, who frowned deeply. "He's coming back tonight? That's actually perfect timing. Olivia will be safely in post-op care, surrounded by hospital staff. And security," I added quietly. Harold arranged for a trust security officer to be posted near Olivia's room, just in case. I hadn't mentioned this detail earlier, not wanting to alarm Jennifer unnecessarily, but Daniel's escalating threats made me grateful for Harold's foresight. I composed a single reply to Daniel's barrage. Olivia is in surgery now for her spinal correction. I am aware of your actual location and activities. Any attempt to create a disturbance at the hospital will result in immediate police involvement. We will discuss the trust situation after my daughter's recovery is assured. His response was immediate. My daughter, too. You can't keep me from her. I didn't dignify this with a reply. Instead, I silenced my phone and tucked it away, focusing on the more important matters at hand. Jennifer brought us coffee, and we settled in for the long wait, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. At 9:30, Harold Bennett called for an update. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. Olivia is in surgery now, I informed him. Everything's proceeding as planned. Good, he replied. I've been monitoring the situation with your husband. He's apparently charged a last-minute flight back to Oak Ridge on a corporate card belonging to Megan Phillips. This unexpected detail caught me off guard. She's financing his return? It appears so. Our information suggests she's remaining in Puerto Vallarta, however. The reservation there has been modified to a single occupant. I processed this information, unsure whether to feel amused or disgusted that Daniel had apparently convinced his mistress to fund his emergency return. He's threatening to come to the hospital tonight. The security team is prepared, Harold assured me. Officer Diaz will be positioned near Olivia's recovery room by 2 p.m., well before your husband could possibly arrive. Additionally, hospital. Administration has been quietly advised of potential security concerns. You notified the hospital? Only in general terms, that a non-custodial family member might attempt unauthorized access. Standard protocol in high-asset family situations. The efficiency with which Harold had anticipated and managed these details reminded me again of why my grandfather had trusted him implicitly. Thank you, Harold. One more thing, he added. The initial financial review indicates that Daniel has indeed been using trust funds to support his business ventures, including a recent property development that appears to be significantly underwater. Without continued access to Montgomery resources, his financial situation may be more precarious than we initially thought. This revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow it did. Had Daniel married me primarily for financial security? Had our entire relationship been a calculated move on his part? Keep digging, I instructed. I want to know everything before I face him. After ending the call, I returned to Jennifer in the waiting room, sharing Harold's updates in hushed tones. So he used your family's money to prop up failing business ventures while criticizing your excessive caution with finances? Jennifer's outrage was palpable. The audacity of this man knows no bounds. It explains his panic, I observed. He's not just losing vacation spending money, he's potentially losing everything. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. At 11:15, a surgical nurse appeared with a brief update. Everything proceeding normally, no complications. This temporary relief carried us through another hour of waiting until, finally, at 12:40 p.m., Dr. Morris appeared in the waiting room doorway, still dressed in surgical scrubs. Jennifer and I stood immediately, hearts pounding in unison as she approached. Olivia did beautifully, Dr. Morris announced, her tired smile conveying genuine satisfaction. The correction was completely successful. We achieved better spinal alignment than I initially projected, which should mean less compensatory adjustment for her body during recovery. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to grip Jennifer's arm for support. When can I see her? She's in post-anesthesia care now. The nursing team is monitoring her vital signs as she wakes up. You can see her in about 30 minutes once she's more alert. She'll be groggy and uncomfortable, but that's completely normal. Dr. Morris reviewed the immediate post-operative expectations, pain management, mobility restrictions, monitoring, requirements, before excusing herself to complete surgical documentation. Jennifer and I hugged tightly. the emotional release of good news overwhelming after hours of tense anticipation. At 1:15 p.m., Amelia returned to escort me to the post-anesthesia care unit, where Olivia was beginning to regain consciousness. Jennifer remained in the waiting area, giving us privacy for this delicate moment. The PACU was a large open room with multiple beds separated by curtains, each surrounded by monitoring equipment and staffed by vigilant nurses. Olivia appeared smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her, pale against the white sheets, various tubes and wires connecting her to machines tracking her vital functions. "She's starting to wake up," the PACU nurse explained softly. "She might be confused or upset, completely normal with pediatric patients coming out of anesthesia. Your voice will help ground her." I took the chair beside Olivia's bed, gently, clasping her hand where it lay on top of the blanket. "Hey, sweetheart, it's Mom. Your surgery is all done and you did amazing." Her eyelids fluttered, brow furrowing slightly before her gaze, unfocused and confused, found mine. "Mom?" Her voice was raspy from the breathing tube used during surgery. "Right here, just like I promised. Hurts," she whispered, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I know, honey. The doctors are giving you medicine for the pain. It'll get better." I stroked her forehead, carefully avoiding the monitoring sensors attached to her skin. The PACU nurse adjusted something in Olivia's IV line. "That's an additional dose of pain medication. It should help within a few minutes." Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness over the next hour as her body processed the anesthesia. Each time she woke, she seemed slightly more coherent, though the pain medication kept her subdued. By 3 p.m., she was alert enough for transfer to her regular hospital room, where Jennifer was waiting with Mr. Flopsy and the comfort items we'd packed. The private room, another benefit of the Montgomery connection, was spacious enough to accommodate a parent's pull-out bed where I would spend the night. Jennifer had arranged Olivia's personal items, her tablet, headphones, favorite blanket, to make the sterile space feel more welcoming. As promised, Officer Diaz from the Trust security team positioned himself discreetly near the nurses' station with a clear view of Olivia's door. His presence was unobtrusive but reassuring, especially given Daniel's threatened arrival later that evening. By 4 p.m., Olivia was settled as comfortably as possible, her pain managed though not eliminated. She dozed intermittently, the television playing softly in the background. Jennifer had gone to the cafeteria to bring back dinner for us when my phone vibrated with a text from Harold. "Daniel's flight landed. Our team tracked him retrieving his car from long-term parking. Estimated arrival at hospital within 30 minutes." I showed the message to Olivia's nurse, Rachel, who had been briefed on the situation. "We'll make sure he checks in at the nurses' station before being allowed into the room," she assured me. "Standard protocol with pediatric patients." "Thank you," I replied, grateful for the hospital's procedures that would provide an additional buffer. Jennifer returned with food neither of us had appetite for, sensing my growing tension as Daniel's arrival approached. "Do you want me to stay when he gets here?" she asked, arranging sandwich halves on paper plates. "No," I decided after a moment's consideration. "This first confrontation should be between us. Could you wait in the family lounge down the hall? I'll text if I need you." She nodded, squeezing my shoulder supportively. "Just say the word and I'll be here in seconds, with reinforcements if necessary." At 5:23 p.m., the inevitable text arrived from Daniel. "I'm at the hospital. What room?" I responded simply, "Pediatric surgical wing, room 415. Check in at the nurses' station first." 8 minutes later, raised voices from the corridor signaled Daniel's arrival. I stood, moving to position myself between Olivia's bed and the door, grateful she was currently sleeping under the influence of pain medication. "Sir, you need to lower your voice. This is a pediatric recovery ward." Rachel's professional tone carried clearly despite her evident effort to de-escalate the situation. "I'm her father. I have every right to see her." Daniel's voice, louder than appropriate for the setting, carried the distinctive edge of entitlement I recognized from our worst arguments. "No one is disputing that, Mr. Wilson. We simply need you to check in properly and follow our visitation protocols." Officer Diaz's deeper voice joined the conversation, too low for me to distinguish the words, but apparently effective enough to moderate Daniel's volume when he responded. "Fine, I've checked in. Now I'm going to see my daughter." The door opened and Daniel stepped into the room, stopping abruptly when he saw me standing guard near Olivia's bed. He looked disheveled in a way I'd never seen before, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothing that suggested hasty packing, with dark circles under reddened eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the beeping of Olivia's monitoring equipment the only sound breaking the tension between us. "What the hell have you done, Rebecca?" he finally hissed, keeping his voice low enough not to disturb Olivia but unable to disguise his fury. "I've secured my daughter's future," I replied calmly, maintaining eye contact. Something her father apparently couldn't be bothered to prioritize over a beach vacation with his girlfriend. His face flushed deep red. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted. The Montgomery Trust was established with explicit provisions for exactly this scenario. My grandfather anticipated that someone might one day try to take advantage of his family's resources while failing to honor the responsibilities that come with them. Daniel stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Those accounts fund my business operations. Do you have any idea what you've done? I have investors expecting returns, properties in development, which you financed using resources you accessed through our marriage," I finished for him. "Resources you were never entitled to beyond what the trust administrators approved. Resources you apparently felt comfortable utilizing while abandoning your family obligations." "I wasn't," he began, then glanced toward Olivia sleeping. "Form," lowering his voice further. "I wasn't abandoning anything. The surgery could have been rescheduled. It wasn't urgent." The casual dismissal of our daughter's pain, her needs, her importance, struck me with the force of physical blow. "Not urgent to you, perhaps, but Olivia has been in increasing pain for months. Pain you've consistently minimized or ignored while you built your precious real estate portfolio and apparently cultivated a relationship with Megan Phillips." His eyes widened slightly at the mention of her name. "How did you—" "I know everything. Daniel," I said quietly. "The vacation in Puerto Vallarta. The deep-sea fishing excursion scheduled during Olivia's original surgery time. The room at El Dorado Resort. I have copies of all of it." He seemed to deflate slightly, glancing around, as if seeking escape. "I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "I'm not interested in your explanations or excuses. The only thing that matters right now is Olivia's recovery. She's just had major spinal surgery. Surgery you plan to miss entirely for a romantic getaway?" A flicker of genuine shame crossed his features before his anger reasserted itself. "This isn't over, Rebecca. You can't just unilaterally cut me off from financial resources I depend on. My lawyer will—" "Your lawyer will explain the trust provisions to you," I interrupted again, "and the extensive documentation we've compiled regarding your actions. But by all means, pursue legal remedies if you wish. The Montgomery Trust has never lost a case." Daniel opened his mouth to respond when a small voice from the bed stopped him cold. "Dad? Is that you?" We both turned to see Olivia awake, blinking groggily at her father with a mixture of confusion and hope that broke my heart. Daniel's demeanor transformed instantly, his face arranging itself into the concerned parent mask he wore so convincingly. "Hey there, Livebug. I came as soon as I could." He moved toward the bed, but I stepped sideways, blocking his path. "She's just had major surgery," I reminded him quietly. "She's in significant pain and needs calm, positive support right now." For once, Daniel seemed to recognize the boundary, stopping his advance though his expression hardened at my intervention. He addressed Olivia from where he stood. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier. There was an emergency with work. You said you were in Houston, Olivia murmured, her pain medication making her words slightly slurred. Mom said you had important meetings. The simple statement hung in the air between us, innocent, yet damning. Daniel shot me a quick, accusatory glance before responding. That's right. Very important client meetings. But I managed to get away as soon as I could to be here for you. Olivia's face brightened slightly despite her obvious discomfort. Are you staying? Mom's gonna sleep here tonight, but there's a chair that folds out. The naked hope in her voice made my chest ache. Even now, after years of disappointments, she still wanted her father's presence, his approval, his love. Daniel hesitated, glancing between Olivia's expectant face and my cool, assessing gaze. I need to handle some business matters tonight. Liv, but I'll come back first thing tomorrow morning, okay? The light in Olivia's eyes dimmed, though she nodded with practiced acceptance. Okay, Dad. You should rest now, I told her gently, adjusting her blanket. The more you sleep, the faster you'll heal. As Olivia's eyes drifted closed again, I gestured to Daniel to step into the small attached bathroom where we could speak privately without leaving our daughter unattended. He followed reluctantly, closing the door behind us. Business matters? I questioned softly, arms crossed. Or damage control for the financial disaster you're facing without access to my family's money? You've made your point, Rebecca, he hissed. You've humiliated me, stranded my colleague in Mexico, and potentially destroyed my business. Happy now? Happy, I repeated incredulously. You think any of this makes me happy? My daughter just had major surgery that her father planned to skip entirely. My marriage is apparently a sham built on financial opportunism. No, Daniel, I'm not happy. I'm determined. Determined to do what? Ruin me? I studied him for a moment. This man I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, whose child I'd carried and raised, whose ambitions I'd supported even when they came at the expense of my own. How had I missed the fundamental selfishness that defined him? I'm determined to protect Olivia, I finally answered. And myself. The trust suspension is just the beginning. Harold is preparing divorce papers as we speak, with full documentation of your abandonment and infidelity. Daniel paled visibly. You can't. I can, and I will, I stated firmly. The only question remaining is whether you choose to make this process relatively civilized for Olivia's sake, or whether you force us into a contentious battle you cannot win. You bitch, he breathed, mask fully slipping now. You've been planning this, waiting for the right moment. No, Daniel, I corrected him. You planned this when you decided our daughter's health was less important than your affair. You orchestrated this outcome with every lie, every dismissal of Olivia's pain, every secret financial maneuver using resources that were never truly yours. Before he could respond, a gentle knock at the bathroom door interrupted us. Rachel's voice called through. Mrs. Wilson, Olivia's asking for you. I'll be right there, I called back, then fixed Daniel with a final level gaze. You have a choice now. Be the father Olivia deserves, present, supportive, focused on her needs, or continue prioritizing yourself at her expense. But understand that I will no longer enable your neglect or shield her from the consequences of your choices. I moved past him, opening the door to return to our daughter's bedside. Daniel remained in the bathroom for several long moments before emerging, his expression carefully composed once more. I should go handle those business matters, he announced, not meeting my eyes. Tell Liv I'll see her tomorrow. As he left the room, Officer Diaz nodded subtly to me from his position near the door, confirming he would monitor Daniel's departure from the hospital. Where did Dad go? Olivia asked drowsily as I settled into the chair beside her. He had Some things to take care of, sweetie. He said he'll be back tomorrow. Whether this was truth or another of Daniel's empty promises remained to be seen. Is everything okay with you and Dad? She asked, her perception cutting through her medication. Haze with uncomfortable accuracy. You both seemed angry. I stroked her hair gently, considering how much truth was appropriate in this moment. Dad and I are dealing with some grown-up problems right now, I admitted carefully. But what's most important is that we both love you very much, and we're both going to make sure you have everything you need to recover properly. This seemed to satisfy her for now, her eyelids growing heavy again as the pain medication pulled her back toward sleep. I'm glad you're staying. Here tonight, Mom, she murmured. You always keep your promises. The simple observation, offered without judgment or comparison, nonetheless highlighted the stark difference between Daniel's parenting and my own. As Olivia drifted back to sleep, I texted Jennifer that Daniel had left and it was safe to return. Officer Diaz appeared briefly in the doorway. Mr. Wilson has left the building, Mrs. Wilson. We'll maintain a security presence overnight as planned. Thank you, I replied quietly, grateful for his professional discretion. As evening settled over the hospital, bringing the quieter rhythms of night shifts and dimmed lighting, I found myself in a moment of unexpected peace. The confrontation with Daniel had been unpleasant but clarifying. There would be difficult days ahead, legal proceedings, financial disentanglements, and most importantly, helping Olivia understand and process the changing family dynamic. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly aligned with my own values and strength. The Montgomery name and resources had provided tools for this reclamation, but the determination to protect what mattered most had come from within me. As I prepared the pull-out bed for the night, arranging pillows and blankets from home, Jennifer returned with fresh coffee and quiet support. Everything okay? She asked, setting the coffee on the bedside table. I glanced at Olivia, sleeping peacefully with Mr. Flopsy clutched to her side, her body beginning its long healing process. Not yet, I answered honestly, but it will be. Morning arrived in Olivia's hospital room with the methodical routine of medical care, vital sign checks, medication adjustments, and the quiet efficiency of the nursing team. I woke from my fitful sleep on the pull-out chair to find Olivia already awake, her face pinched with discomfort, but her eyes clearer than they had been since surgery. Morning, sweetheart, I said, immediately moving to her bedside. How's the pain? It's bad, she admitted, attempting to shift position before wincing. Worse than yesterday. That's actually normal, explained Rachel, who had returned for the morning shift. The first 24 hours after surgery, the anesthesia and initial pain medications provide significant coverage. Day 2 is typically when patients feel the full impact of the procedure. She checked the medication schedule on Olivia's chart. We can administer the next dose now. It should help considerably. I held Olivia's hand as Rachel administered the pain medication through the IV line, murmuring reassurances as we waited, for relief to spread through her body. Gradually, the tension in Olivia's face eased as the powerful medication took effect. Better? I asked, brushing her hair back from her forehead. She nodded, blinking slowly as drowsiness accompanied the pain relief. Is Dad coming this morning? He promised. The innocent question squeezed my heart. Despite everything, Olivia still looked for her father, still believed in his promises. We'll see, honey. He mentioned he had some business to handle. Rachel caught my eye with a knowing glance as she updated Olivia's chart. Dr. Morris will be by around 9 for a post-op assessment. If everything looks good, we'll get Olivia up for her first physical therapy session this afternoon. So soon? I asked, surprised. Early mobilization is key to successful recovery with spinal surgeries, Rachel explained. Don't worry, it will be very gentle, just enough to prevent complications from extended bed rest. After Rachel left, Jennifer arrived with fresh coffee and a change of clothes for me. She'd spent the night at our house but had texted regularly for updates on Olivia's condition. "How's our patient this morning?" she asked cheerfully, setting a paper bag of pastries on the bedside table. "Sore but brave," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Jennifer had barely settled into the visitor's chair when my phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Meeting scheduled with Daniel and his attorney this afternoon, 2 p.m. at my office. Security arrangements in place. Will you attend or prefer I handle?" I hesitated, glancing at Olivia, who had drifted into a light doze from her pain medication. Daniel's attorney involvement suggested he was gearing up for a fight rather than accepting the situation. "What is it?" Jennifer asked, noting my expression. I showed her the message. "Daniel's lawyered up already." "That was fast," she remarked. "Though not surprising, his entire financial structure must be collapsing without access to your family's money. The question is whether I should be there or stay with Olivia." Jennifer considered this. "What time is her physical therapy scheduled?" "Not until 4, according to Rachel." "Then you should go," Jennifer stated firmly. "Better to face this head-on. Establish your position of strength from the beginning. I'll stay with Olivia. If Daniel actually shows up here while you're gone, I'll text you immediately." The decision was difficult, but Jennifer's logic was sound. I texted Harold back, "I'll be there. Please arrange for Officer Diaz to remain with Olivia during my absence. Jennifer Taylor will be with her as well." Harold's response was immediate. "Confirmed. Car will collect you from hospital at 1:30 p.m. My reply to this offer caught in my throat. The Trust's resources, cars, security personnel, legal teams, had always been available to me, yet I had rarely utilized them during my marriage to Daniel. What had once felt like an imposition of family control now provided essential support. My grandfather's foresight in creating these protective structures suddenly seemed less controlling and more prescient. Dr. Morris arrived precisely at 9, accompanied by a surgical resident who would assist with removing Olivia's surgical dressing for the first time. I stood on one side of Olivia's bed, holding her hand as Dr. Morris gently revealed the incision that ran along her spine. "Beautiful work, if I do say so myself," Dr. Morris commented, examining the neat row of sutures. "Minimal swelling, no? Signs of infection. Excellent alignment." She gestured for me to look, and I steeled myself before glancing at the surgical site. Despite the angry redness surrounding the incision, I could already see that Olivia's spine appeared straighter, the previous visible curve substantially corrected. "The hardware we placed is supporting your spine in its new, corrected position," Dr. Morris explained to Olivia, showing her pictures on a tablet. "These titanium rods and screws will become part of you, supporting your spine as it heals in proper alignment." Olivia stared at the images with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "Will I set off metal detectors at the airport?" Dr. Morris laughed. "That's always the first question. No, you won't set off metal detectors, and you'll be able to do almost everything you did before surgery once you're fully healed." "Even soccer?" Olivia asked hopefully. "Even soccer, though we'll need to wait about 6 months before you return to contact sports." Dr. Morris made additional notes in the chart. "Your mom tells me you're quite the athlete." Olivia smiled slightly. "Dad says I got my coordination from him. He played college soccer, you know." The casual mention of Daniel sent an unexpected pang through me. For all his failings, he had shared genuine moments of connection with Olivia, particularly around sports. These complicated emotional threads would need careful untangling in the months ahead. After Dr. Morris left, Olivia drifted in and out of sleep while I used the time to prepare for my afternoon meeting. I reviewed notes from Harold, familiarizing myself with the legal parameters of our situation and the documented evidence supporting the trust suspension. At 12:30, a lunch tray arrived for Olivia, her first solid food since surgery. She managed a few bites of gelatin and broth before setting down her spoon, fatigue evident in her movements. Not hungry? I asked, concerned. The medicine makes my stomach feel weird, she admitted. Can I just rest until physical therapy? Of course, sweetheart. I adjusted her pillows, then checked my watch. I need to step out for a meeting this afternoon, but Aunt Jen will stay with you the whole time. I'll be back before your therapy session. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Where are you going? Is it about Dad? I hesitated, weighing honesty against protection. Yes, it is. Dad and I need to talk about some important things with our lawyers. Adult things. Are you getting divorced? She asked directly, her perception cutting through my careful phrasing. The question deserved a truthful answer. We're discussing that possibility, yes. But nothing will be decided today, and you don't need to worry about any of this right now. Your job is to focus on healing. Tears welled in her eyes. Is it because Dad missed my surgery? Oh, honey. I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand carefully. It's much more complicated than that. Dad and I have been having problems for a while, and we need to figure out what's best for everyone. But what about me? What's best for me? Her voice broke, the emotional strain finally penetrating the brave front she'd maintained. You are my absolute priority, I assured her, brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. No matter what happens between your dad and me, we both love you very much. That will never change. Jennifer arrived as promised at 1:15, carrying a bag with Olivia's favorite books and her tablet loaded with movies. Ready for our spa afternoon? She announced cheerfully, deliberately lightening the atmosphere. I've brought face masks and nail polish for later. Olivia managed a small smile despite her earlier tears. Can we do the glittery blue on my toes? Absolutely. Blue glitter is perfect for surgical recovery. It's scientifically proven. Jennifer winked, setting up her supplies on the rolling tray table. At 1:30 precisely, my phone buzzed with a message from security. Car waiting at South Entrance. I kissed Olivia's forehead. I'll be back in time for physical therapy, I promise. Be good for Aunt Jen. I will. She nodded solemnly. Mom, tell Dad I miss him, okay? The request nearly undid my composure, but I managed a steady nod before collecting my purse and exiting the room. In the hallway, I took a moment to gather myself, inhaling deeply to center my thoughts before heading to the elevator. The Montgomery Trust security detail had sent a black Lexus sedan with a driver who introduced himself simply as Phillips, ma'am. The drive to Harold's office took us through the business district of Oak Ridge, past the modern glass tower where Daniel's firm occupied the 14th floor. I wondered if he was there now, desperately trying to shore up business relationships that had depended on Montgomery connections and capital. Harold's offices appeared exactly as they had yesterday, the atmosphere of established power unchanged by the turmoil of personal lives. His assistant escorted me directly to a conference room where Harold waited, surrounded by folders of documents organized with meticulous precision. Rebecca, he greeted me, rising from his chair. How is Olivia today? Sore but recovering. Well, I replied, setting my purse on a credenza. Thank you for arranging security at the hospital. Of course. He gestured to the materials spread before him. I've prepared comprehensive documentation regarding Daniel's access to trust resources, his usage patterns, and the evidence supporting suspension. My colleague Victoria Chen will join us as well. She specializes in high-asset divorces and will handle that aspect if we proceed in that direction. As if on cue, the door opened to admit a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Mrs. Wilson, she greeted me with a firm handshake. I've reviewed your situation thoroughly. We're well-positioned should divorce proceedings become necessary. I nodded, oddly comforted by her brisk confidence. And Daniel's attorney? Do we know who he's retained? James Prescott, Harold replied, his tone conveying professional assessment rather than personal judgment. Competent in corporate matters, but less experienced in trust litigation. An interesting choice. Before we could discuss further, Harold's assistant announced the arrival of Daniel and his counsel. Harold nodded for her to send them in, then turned to me. Remember, you hold the stronger position both legally and morally. There's no need to volunteer information or justify your actions. Let them present their case first. I nodded, adjusting my posture as the door opened to admit Daniel and a silver-haired man I recognized from local legal circles. Daniel looked marginally better than he had at the hospital, freshly shaven, wearing one of his expensive suits, but the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes and mouth. "Mr. Wilson, Mr. Prescott," Harold greeted them professionally. "Please be seated. This is my colleague, Victoria Chen, who will be joining us." Daniel's gaze fixed on me, a mixture of anger and calculation in his expression. He had clearly expected to face only Harold, not me. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm as they took seats across the polished conference table. "Let's begin by establishing parameters for our discussion," Harold stated, opening a folder. "My client has exercised her rights under the Montgomery Family Trust to suspend spousal access privileges due to documented violations of the trust's moral and fiduciary requirements." Prescott cleared his throat. "My client disputes both the legitimacy of this suspension and the alleged violations. Mr. Wilson has been a responsible steward of all resources made available to him through his marriage." Harold raised an eyebrow slightly. "I believe the documentary evidence suggests otherwise." He slid several files across the table. These contain flight records, hotel reservations, and recreational bookings that coincide precisely with his daughter's scheduled spinal surgery. Surgery Mr. Wilson was fully aware of, as evidenced by calendar invitations, doctor's appointment records, and his own signed consent forms as a parent. Daniel leaned toward his attorney, whispering something urgently, but Prescott maintained a neutral expression as he opened the files. "Additionally," Harold continued, "financial audits indicate Mr. Wilson has utilized trust resources for business ventures without proper disclosure to trust administrators, including a property development in the Riverside district that appears to be significantly overleveraged." At this, Daniel's composure cracked visibly. "That's a temporary cash flow issue that would have resolved within weeks if Rebecca hadn't interfered. The trust benefits from those investments." "Daniel," Prescott cautioned, placing a hand on his client's arm again. "The trust has never authorized speculative real estate investments," Harold corrected calmly. "All business allocations were specifically designated for your financial advisory practice, not property development." Victoria Chen opened her own folder, speaking for the first time. "Furthermore, we've documented transfers from trust adjacent accounts to personal expenses that fall well outside appropriate usage guidelines." She pushed forward credit card statements highlighting charges at jewelry stores, luxury boutiques, and restaurants in cities where Daniel had claimed to be on business trips. "Gifts for my wife," Daniel protested, though his gaze slipped away from mine as he said it. "Interesting timing, then," Victoria observed dispassionately. "These purchases coincide with periods when Mrs. Wilson was out of town visiting her cousin in Chicago. Perhaps you'd care to clarify who received these items." Daniel's mouth tightened, but he remained silent at a warning look from Prescott. "My client acknowledges certain personal indiscretions," Prescott stated carefully. "However, these do not justify the complete financial isolation Mrs. Wilson has imposed. Mr. Wilson has business obligations and commitments that require immediate liquidity. Those obligations were created using resources he accessed solely through his marriage," I said, speaking for the first time. "Resources that came with clear conditions he chose to ignore." Daniel's eyes narrowed at my words. "So this is punishment? Financial revenge because I had an affair?" "This is protection," I corrected evenly. "Protection of assets that were never yours to risk on speculative investments." protection of resources intended for our daughter's welfare, which you evidently considered less important than a vacation with your girlfriend. I rescheduled the surgery once before without issue, Daniel countered defensively. It's not like her condition was life-threatening. The doctors themselves said timing was flexible. The casual dismissal of Olivia's pain and needs still had the power to shock me. She was in pain, Daniel. Increasing pain that affected her sleep, her ability to participate in activities, her quality of life. Pain you consistently minimized because acknowledging it might interfere with your plans. Harold intervened smoothly, redirecting the conversation back to legal matters. Regardless of Mr. Wilson's personal assessment of his daughter's medical needs, the trust documentation is clear. Suspension of access is authorized when spousal behavior demonstrates priorities contrary to family welfare or fiduciary responsibility. We intend to challenge this interpretation, Prescott stated firmly. And in the meantime, my client requires immediate restoration of access to certain accounts to prevent catastrophic business consequences. What specific accounts? Victoria inquired, pen poised over her notepad. Prescott slid a document across the table listing 5 accounts and their associated purposes. Harold reviewed it carefully before passing it to me. These are all tied directly to Daniel's business operations, he explained quietly. Restoration would require your approval as primary beneficiary. I studied the list, recognizing account, numbers that had filtered through our household discussions over years of marriage. The total available balance across all 5 accounts exceeded $3 million, significant liquidity that Daniel apparently needed immediately to keep his business ventures afloat. What would happen if access isn't restored? I asked, directing my question to Harold rather than Daniel. Based on our financial analysis, several of Mr. Wilson's development projects would likely face immediate default on construction loans. His primary business, the financial advisory firm, might sustain itself temporarily but would lose significant clientele when investment performance declined due to cash flow constraints. I turned to Daniel, meeting his gaze directly. You built your entire business on Montgomery money while criticizing my family's old-fashioned approach to wealth management? His jaw tightened. I built that business through hard work and strategic vision. The Montgomery resources merely provided initial capitalization, which I've repaid through growth and returns. Returns that exist only on paper until realized, Harold noted. The actual liquidity position of Wilson Financial is precarious, at best. Prescott intervened before Daniel could respond. My client is prepared to discuss reasonable accommodations regarding financial arrangements, but we must address the immediate liquidity crisis first. Mr. Wilson proposes a gradual transition rather than this abrupt suspension. I considered the proposal, turning it over in my mind. Daniel watched me intently, likely calculating the emotional leverage he might still hold after 12 years of marriage. But the woman he had manipulated in the past, the accommodating wife who prioritized harmony over accountability, no longer existed. I'm willing to consider partial, controlled restoration under specific conditions, I finally said, surprising everyone at the table, including Harold. What conditions? Daniel asked warily. I laid them out calmly. First, Daniel signs comprehensive divorce papers today, including full financial disclosure under penalty of perjury. Second, any restored accounts will have dual authorization requirements, both Daniel's signature and a trust administrator's approval for withdrawals over $10,000. Third, Daniel agrees to sell the Riverside development property to repay unauthorized trust utilization. Daniel's face flushed with anger. That's extortion. The Riverside property will be worth double its current valuation when completed. If completed, Harold corrected. Current construction estimates suggest you're at least 40% over budget with substantial work remaining. And these terms are non-negotiable? Prescott asked, his professional demeanor masking whatever thoughts he might have about the proposal. The terms regarding financial controls are firm, I confirmed. The divorce parameters can be structured fairly, but the process begins today, not after Daniel stabilizes his business using Montgomery resources. Victoria slid a document from her portfolio. We've prepared standard divorce filing papers. Mr. Wilson can review them now, with the understanding that detailed asset division will follow in subsequent negotiations. Daniel stared at the papers, then at me, disbelief evident in his expression. You're really doing this? Ending our marriage and dismantling my business in one afternoon? You ended our marriage when you chose to abandon our daughter during major surgery for a vacation with your mistress, I replied quietly. I'm simply formalizing that reality and protecting what remains. A heavy silence fell over the conference room. Daniel exchanged whispered comments with Prescott while Harold and Victoria waited patiently, their expressions revealing nothing of their thoughts. Finally, Daniel straightened in his chair. I need to make a phone call before I agree to anything. Harold nodded. You may use the small conference room next door. Mr. Prescott can accompany you if you wish. Once they had left, Harold turned to me. Are you certain about this approach? We could maintain complete suspension and let his business situation resolve itself naturally. I'm thinking about Olivia, I explained. Despite everything, he's still her father. If his business collapses completely, it affects her too, both financially and emotionally. This way, there's controlled damage rather than total destruction. Victoria nodded approvingly. Strategic and measured. The dual authorization requirement gives you oversight without the appearance of vindictiveness. Well considered. Daniel and Prescott returned 15 minutes later, their expressions suggesting a difficult conversation had occurred. Daniel took his seat, his demeanor notably subdued. We accept your conditions, with minor adjustments to the financial control mechanisms, Prescott announced. Mr. Wilson will sign the preliminary divorce papers today and comply with full financial disclosure requirements. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of documents, signatures, and legal provisions. Daniel signed the divorce papers with a grim expression, his usual confidence replaced by the wary calculation of a man reassessing his position. The financial agreements included provisions for trust administrators to review all business operations, utilizing Montgomery resources, with oversight powers that clearly made Daniel uncomfortable. Throughout the process, he avoided direct eye contact with me, speaking only when necessary to clarify points or provide required information. When the final document was signed, he stood abruptly. Is that all? Harold gathered the papers methodically. For today, yes. The account access modifications will be processed by close of business. Montgomery Trust administrators will contact you tomorrow regarding ongoing oversight procedures. Daniel nodded stiffly, then finally turned to me. And Olivia? When can I see her? The question caught me off guard. After his failure to appear at the hospital this morning despite his promise, I had half expected him to avoid Olivia until forced to engage. She's having physical therapy at 4 today, I replied. You could visit after 5 when she'll be back in her room and rested. I'll be there, he stated, the first declaration since entering the room that held no defensive undertone. And, Rebecca, I did love you. Whatever you believe now, that was real. Before I could formulate a response to this unexpected sentiment, he turned and left the conference room, Prescott following after a brief nod to the legal team. Harold waited until the door closed before speaking. Well handled, Rebecca. You've established clear boundaries while demonstrating reasonable accommodation. That balanced approach serves you well should this proceed to court, though I suspect Mr. Wilson now recognizes the wisdom of settling amicably. Will his business survive? I asked, gathering my belongings. Victoria considered this. With the limited access you've granted and proper oversight, his legitimate operations should stabilize. The speculative ventures will likely require restructuring or divestiture. But he won't face the complete collapse that seemed imminent yesterday. As we concluded the meeting, I checked my watch. 3:20 p.m. Enough time to return to the hospital before Olivia's physical therapy session. "The car is waiting whenever you're ready," Harold informed me. "And Rebecca, your grandfather would be proud of your handling of this situation. Firm but fair, protecting what matters without seeking vengeance." The commendation warmed me unexpectedly. Throughout my childhood, my grandfather had emphasized the responsibility that accompanied wealth, not just to preserve it, but to wield it with integrity and purpose. Today, I felt I had finally embraced that legacy fully. The journey back to Bay, the hospital provided quiet moments to process the afternoon's events. Daniel had been blindsided by my assertiveness, clearly expecting the passivity that had characterized much of our marriage. His final comment about loving me lingered uncomfortably. Had he loved me? Or had he loved the security, social position, and financial foundation I provided? Perhaps both were true in some complicated way. Arriving at Olivia's room, I found her sitting up in bed for the first time since surgery, Jennifer helping her adjust pillows for support. Her face brightened when she saw me. "Mom, I stood up today, just for a minute, but the physical therapist said I did great." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I crossed to her bed, carefully embracing her. "I'm so proud of you." Jennifer caught my eye over Olivia's shoulder, mouthing, "How did it go?" I gave a subtle thumbs up, promising details later. "Did you see Dad?" Olivia asked, pulling back to study my face. "Did you tell him I miss him?" "I did see him," I confirmed, choosing my words carefully. "And he's planning to visit you this evening, after you've had a chance to rest from therapy." Her eyes widened with genuine pleasure. "Really? He's coming tonight?" That's what he said. I hoped fervently that Daniel would keep this promise, knowing how significant it was to Olivia. "Did you and Dad fix your problems?" she asked, her perception once again cutting through adult pretenses. I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. "We've started working things out in a way that's best for everyone. It's going to take time, and there will be changes. But your dad and I both agree that making sure you're happy and healthy is our top priority." This carefully phrased truth seemed to satisfy her. "So, you're not mad at him anymore?" "It's not about being mad, honey. It's about making sure everyone makes good choices moving forward." I smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Right now, let's focus on getting you better. One day at a time. Okay?" She nodded, settling back against her pillows. "The doctor said I might go home in 3 more days if everything keeps looking good." "That's fantastic news." I genuinely smiled, relieved that her recovery was progressing well. "We have the downstairs guest room all ready for you." As Olivia detailed her physical therapy session, I felt my phone vibrate with a text message. Glancing down, I saw it was from Daniel. "We'll be at hospital by 5:30, bringing her favorite books from home. Can we speak privately when I arrive?" I texted back simply, "Yes, Olivia is looking forward to seeing you." At precisely 5:30, Daniel appeared in the doorway of Olivia's room, carrying a small stack of her favorite books and a plush elephant she'd had since childhood. His hesitation was visible only to me. To Olivia, he presented the confident, cheerful facade that had always characterized his intermittent parenting. "There's my brave girl," he exclaimed, approaching her bed with careful movements that acknowledged her post-surgical state. "Look what I found waiting for you at home." Olivia's face lit up at the sight of the stuffed animal. "Mr. Trunks, I was wondering where he went." "He was hiding under your bed," Daniel explained, gently placing the elephant beside her. "When I told him about your surgery, he insisted on coming to visit." I exchanged a glance with Jennifer, who tactfully rose from her chair. "I'll go grab some coffee and give you all some family time," she announced, squeezing my shoulder briefly as she passed. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel was the attentive father Olivia had always craved. He listened to her detailed explanation of the surgery, examined her incision with appropriate concern when she wanted to show it off, and read aloud from one of the books he'd brought. I sat quietly, observing this performance with complicated emotions. The Daniel who showed up for these moments, fully present, genuinely caring, made his other failures all the more bewildering. When Olivia began to tire, her eyelids growing heavy from the evening dose of pain medication, Daniel carefully tucked Mr. Trunks beside her. "I think someone needs rest," he observed gently. "I'll come back tomorrow, okay? Maybe we can watch one of those baking shows you like." "Promise?" Olivia murmured, already half asleep. "Promise," Daniel confirmed, placing a kiss on her forehead. "Sleep tight, live bug." Once Olivia had drifted fully into sleep, Daniel gestured toward the hallway. I followed him outside, where Officer Diaz maintained his discreet position near the nurse's station. "The security detail is a bit much, don't you think?" Daniel commented, though his tone lacked its earlier defensiveness. "Harold's recommendation," I replied simply. "Standard procedure in high-conflict situations." Daniel winced slightly at the implication, but didn't argue. I wanted to talk about our arrangement moving forward, the visitation schedule with Olivia, specifically. This was not the conversation I had anticipated. I'd expected complaints about the financial restrictions, perhaps attempts to renegotiate terms. What about it? "I want to maintain consistent involvement in her life," he stated, firmly. "Regular visits, participation in her recovery process, attendance at school events when those resume. Whatever happens between us, I won't be a part-time father." The declaration seemed genuine, though it contradicted his recent behavior, so completely that skepticism was inevitable. "Your actions haven't demonstrated that commitment, Daniel." He looked away, jaw tightening briefly before he responded. "I know, I've made terrible choices, inexcusable ones. But losing everything today? It's been clarifying. I don't want to lose Olivia, too." "You haven't lost her," I pointed out. "She still adores you, still lights up when you enter a room, still makes excuses for your absences. The question is whether you'll actually show up consistently or continue disappointing her." Daniel faced me directly then, his expression more open than I'd seen in years. "I'll show up, every time. Whatever structure we create for custody and visitation, I'll honor it completely. Even if it conflicts with business opportunities or personal relationships?" "Yes," he affirmed without hesitation. "I've learned my lesson on priority management." I studied him, trying to discern whether this represented genuine change or simply another performance designed to protect his remaining assets and access. "Actions will matter more than words, Daniel. Olivia deserves consistency, not promises that evaporate when something more appealing comes along." "I understand," he acknowledged quietly. "I'm not asking for trust right now, just an opportunity to demonstrate that I can be the father she deserves." The request was reasonable, and ultimately, maintaining a functional co-parenting relationship would benefit Olivia most. "We'll work with the attorneys to develop a fair visitation schedule once she's recovered. In the meantime, hospital visits are welcome as long as they don't tire her." Daniel nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Thank you." He hesitated before adding, "And Rebecca, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for the choices I made. You and Olivia deserved better." The apology caught me off guard. Daniel rarely admitted wrongdoing without qualification or deflection. Was this another manipulation tactic? Or the first, genuine moment of accountability in our unraveling relationship? "Yes, we did," I agreed simply, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology outright. But what matters now is moving forward in a way that minimizes further damage, especially to Olivia. As we concluded our conversation, Jennifer returned with coffee. eyeing Daniel warily. He acknowledged her with a polite nod before turning back to me. "I'll visit tomorrow afternoon, after my meeting with the trust administrators," he confirmed. "Text me if Olivia needs anything specific from home." After he departed, Jennifer and I returned to Olivia's room, where she continued sleeping peacefully, Mr. Trunks clutched securely against her side. "So that was surprisingly civil," Jennifer observed quietly, handing me one of the coffee cups. "Is the Daniel Wilson I've grown to despise being replaced by an actual human being?" "Time will tell," I replied, sinking into the visitor's chair. "Crisis has a way of either revealing someone's true character or temporarily reshaping it. I'm not sure which we're seeing yet." "Either way, you handled today brilliantly," Jennifer insisted, sitting beside me. "When you called me 2 days ago about Daniel's betrayal, I never imagined we'd be here so quickly. Surgery successful, divorce initiated, financial protections in place. You're a force of nature when properly motivated." Her praise brought an unexpected smile to my lips. "I've spent too many years dampening that force, trying to be the accommodating wife and mother who never rocked the boat. It feels clarifying to reclaim it." "The Montgomery steel is showing through," Jennifer teased gently, referencing my family's reputation for quiet but formidable resolve. "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But this isn't just about the Montgomery name or resources. It's about being the mother Olivia needs, one who protects what matters and models strength rather than accommodation at any cost." As evening settled over the hospital room, bringing the quieter rhythms of night shifts and dimmed lighting, I found myself experiencing a strange sense of peace amidst the upheaval. The future still held many uncertainties. Olivia's recovery, the final divorce terms, reshaping our lives without Daniel's daily presence. But for the first time in years, I felt truly aligned with my own values and strength. The Montgomery name and resources had provided tools for this reclamation, but the determination to protect what mattered most had come from within me. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same clarity and purpose that had guided me through these pivotal days. As I prepared the pull-out bed for another night at Olivia's side, arranging pillows and blankets from home, I gazed at my sleeping daughter, so vulnerable yet so remarkably resilient. Her world had shifted fundamentally this week, though she didn't yet fully understand the extent of those changes. My job now was to ensure that amid all this transformation, she remained secure in the knowledge that she was fiercely loved and protected. That certainty, more than any trust fund or legal arrangement, would be her true inheritance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.